Welcome to Dark Whisper Society by horror author Dark Monarch. For more stories like this one, use the links in the description box. Today we have interesting and chilling story about very common phenomenon. The Sinkhole tells the story of the Miller family, whose suburban serenity is shattered when a small depression appears in their backyard. The narrative begins by highlighting the very real, terrifying danger of sinkholes. Geological phenomena that can appear suddenly, swallow massive amounts of material, and resist all attempts to fill them. As the hole grows from a small dimple to a massive, insatiable pit, the family's attempt to solve the problem with logical, modern methods are repeatedly defeated. Desperate, they install a camera, only to discover that the sinkhole is not a geological accident, but an entry point. Okay, before we start, please consider subscribing to Society. And if you enjoy the story, do leave a like. That helps a lot. Thank you. Enjoy the story. The Sinkhole. Chapter 1. The Growing Scar. The Monday morning started like any other for the Miller family. 10-year-old Lily was complaining about breakfast. 16-year-old Josh was glued to his phone. And Sarah Miller was trying to organize her day, while simultaneously making sure her husband Tom didn't leave his coffee cup on the newly polished mahogany. Then Tom, while doing his customary patrol of their perfectly manicured suburban backyard, let out a grunt of surprise. "Hey, Sarah, come look at this," he called, his voice laced with mild annoyance. Sarah joined him by the back fence, where their prize-winning rose bushes met the thick green lawn. There, nestled amongst the vibrant petals, was a small, perfectly circular depression in the earth. It was no wider than a dinner plate and maybe 6 inches deep. "What is it?" Sarah asked, peering at the neat hole. "Looks like a mini sinkhole," Tom mused, poking it with his foot. "Probably just some old tree root rotted away, or maybe the drainage pipe is finally collapsing. Nothing major." They called a local landscaping company. The next day, a friendly young man named Mike arrived with a wheelbarrow of topsoil and a shovel. He spent 20 minutes tidying up the rose bush, filling the small depression, tamping it down, and reassuring them. "Happens all the time," Mike had said with a grin. "Just settling earth. All good." Tom paid him, feeling a sense of suburban accomplishment. Problem solved. The next morning, however, the problem was decidedly not solved. "Tom!" Sarah's voice was sharper this time, a tremor of unease beneath her usual calm. "You need to see this." He found her by the rose bushes, staring down at the same spot. The small, dinner plate-sized sinkhole was back. But it wasn't just back, it was noticeably larger. Now, it was closer to 2 feet in diameter and almost a foot deep. The edges of the lawn around it looked strangely dry and brittle, as if the grass had suddenly aged years overnight. "That's impossible," Tom muttered, kneeling to inspect it. The soil they had just paid to have put in was gone, swallowed by the earth. The hole now looked like a gaping, dark maw. It was perfectly round, with smooth, almost sculpted sides that sloped inward. There was no loose dirt around it, no evidence of collapse. It looked like it had simply opened. "What is going on?" Lily, who had wandered outside, asked, her face crinkled in confusion. "Probably just needs more serious filling," Josh said, finally looking up from his phone, a flicker of genuine curiosity in his eyes. "Deeper foundation issue, maybe." Tom called Mike again. Mike sounded confused, then concerned. He came back, this time with several bags of gravel and a heavier tamper. He spent over an hour meticulously filling the hole, layer by layer, compacting the earth until it was perfectly flush with the lawn. "I don't know what to tell you, Mr. Miller," Mike said, wiping sweat from his brow. "I put a good 200 pounds of fill in there. It's solid now. Has to be." Tom watched him go, a prickle of unease working its way up his spine. It was a perfectly normal suburban sinkhole, he told himself. Just a particularly stubborn one. The next morning, the Miller family woke up to a chilling silence. The usual morning birdsong was absent. A cold, damp fog hung over their backyard. And where Mike had spent hours filling the sinkhole, there was now a gaping, black pit. It was almost 5 feet wide and seemed bottomless, a circular void that stared up at the pale sky. The edges were still unervingly smooth, as if bored into the earth. The rose bushes closest to it were wilted and brown, as though their life had been sucked out. And from the depths of the blackness, a faint, rhythmic thump-thump could be heard. It was barely audible, a deep vibration that seemed to come from far, far below. The Miller family stood by their back porch, staring at the growing scar on their lawn. This was no longer a drainage problem. This was something else entirely. Something that refused to be filled, something that refused to be ignored, something that was growing and waiting. Chapter 2. The Camera's Eye. The 5-foot sinkhole became the terrifying focal point of the Millers' backyard. Tom had called city services, geological surveys, even a private investigator specializing in strange phenomena, all to no avail. Everyone offered theories: subterranean river, ancient fault line, neglected septic tank, but no one offered a solution that explained why it refused to stay filled or why it was growing so rapidly. The rhythmic thump-thump from its depths had grown louder. It was now a deep, resonant sound, like a slow, heavy heartbeat far below their feet. Lily, their youngest, refused to go in the backyard. Josh, ever the tech-savvy one, was unnerved, but also morbidly fascinated. He started doing research into sinkhole folklore, finding chilling stories of earth mouths and places where the ground eats. Sarah, practical and resilient, was slowly cracking under the strain. She woke up at night, convinced she could hear faint, guttural sounds emanating from the hole. "We need to put a camera on it," Josh declared one evening at dinner, pushing his food around his plate. "If something's coming out, we need to know. And if it's just collapsing further, we need proof for the insurance." Tom, desperate for a logical explanation, agreed. The next day, he bought a high-resolution night vision security camera. He mounted it on a sturdy pole, positioning it perfectly to capture the entire span of the sinkhole, its lens pointing directly into the black abyss. "If anything moves, we'll see it," he told Sarah, trying to sound confident. "Then we'll know what we're dealing with." That night, the Miller family sat in their living room, staring at a monitor connected to the camera feed. The sinkhole was a perfect black circle in the center of the screen, surrounded by the grainy, green-tinted landscape of their backyard in night vision. The only sound in the room was the faint, deep thump-thump from outside, occasionally punctuated by a low, drawn-out groan that seemed to resonate from the earth itself. Hours passed. Nothing happened. The air in the room grew heavy with a mixture of fear and disappointment. "See," Tom said, trying to force a reassuring tone. "Just a hole. A weird, annoying hole, but still just a hole." Josh, however, kept his eyes glued to the screen. "Wait," he whispered, leaning forward. "Did you see that?" The camera feed, which had been perfectly still, now showed a subtle disturbance. A tiny ripple of movement, like heat haze, emanated from the very center of the sinkhole, just above the blackness. The rhythmic thump-thump outside seemed to intensify, growing louder, more insistent. Then, from the very deepest part of the pit, a faint, pale light began to emerge. It was not a steady glow, but an intermittent shimmer, like something wet and bioluminescent rising through murky water. The light grew, pulsing with a thump-thump from below, and then something began to climb. The first thing to appear was a long, thin appendage, slick with whatever pale light it radiated. It was jointed unnaturally graceful and ended in a cluster of sharp, grasping digits. It dug into the smooth, soil-less sides of the sinkhole and slowly, with terrifying deliberation, pulled itself upward. The thump-thump grew into a desperate, rushing beat, almost like a frantic heart. The light intensified, revealing more of the thing. It was dark-bodied, multi-limbed, and vaguely humanoid, but its proportions were all wrong. Too long, too thin, too many joints. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace, as if it had all the time in the world, or as if it were just awakening. The Miller family watched in petrified silence as the creature heaved itself over the lip of the sinkhole, its pale, glowing form now fully visible against the grainy green of the lawn. It stood on 4 incredibly thin legs, its body hunched and glistening. Then, slowly, almost cautiously, it raised a head that was too small for its body, and its glowing, pupil-less eyes, 2 points of pure, unsettling light, fixed on the Miller's house. The camera feed remained steady, capturing every horrific detail as the creature, with a series of wet, clicking sounds, began to move. It took its first step on their perfectly manicured lawn, its multi-jointed limbs unfolding with sickening grace. And then it began to walk towards the house. Chapter 3: The Uninvited Guest. The creature moved slowly but deliberately, its pale, glowing form eerily luminous against the dark lawn in the night vision feed. Its multiple limbs provided an unsettling gait, a low, ground-skimming crawl that was disturbingly quiet. The rhythmic thump-thump from the sinkhole behind it faded as it moved, as if its emergence had temporarily quieted the earth. The Miller family sat frozen in their living room, watching the monstrous anomaly approach their home on the monitor. Lily let out a whimpering sound, burying her face in Sarah's side. Josh, wide-eyed, had dropped his phone. Tom gripped the armrest of his chair so tightly his knuckles were white. The creature reached the back porch. It paused, its small, malformed head tilting, as if listening. Its glowing eyes swept over the back door, the windows, lingering on the living room where they sat in terrified darkness. Then one of its elongated, jointed arms reached out, its sharp digits extending. It scraped against the back door, a soft, dry scratching that somehow vibrated through the camera feed and into their very bones. "It knows we're here," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's just curious," Tom stammered, trying to inject a semblance of logic into the surreal horror. "It's exploring." But the scratching intensified. It moved from the door to the glass of the sliding patio door, then to the living room window, a persistent, rhythmic rasp that was no longer curious, but insistent. The creature was tracing their movements, their presence, with its sharp, probing digits. Josh, despite his terror, finally found his voice. "Dad, what do we do?" We call the police," Tom said, fumbling for his phone. His hand was shaking too badly to dial. Suddenly, a loud, guttural groan echoed from outside, followed by a wet slurp as one of the creature's limbs seemed to press harder against the window pane. The glass of the window, though thick, began to vibrate. A faint, sickening smell, like damp earth mixed with something decaying and metallic, started to permeate the living room. "It's trying to get in," Lily cried, tears streaming down her face. Just as Tom finally managed to dial 911, the creature paused its scratching. It lowered its head, and a series of soft, clicking noises emanated from its form. Then it pressed its entire head against the glass. The light from its eyes, previously a soft glow, now pulsed with an intense, sickly yellow hue. The light seemed to penetrate the glass, washing over the family in the dark living room, a tangible, suffocating wave of alien energy. Tom barked into the phone. "There's a thing in our backyard. It came out of the sinkhole. It's trying to get into the house." The 911 operator's voice was calm, but tinged with skepticism. "Sir, can you describe the intruder? Is it human?" As Tom stammered for words, the creature outside the window began to mimic him. A low, distorted gurgle, followed by a series of wet clicks, sounded vaguely like human speech, warped and wrong. "Yes, sir. Can you describe human?" The monstrous parody sent a fresh wave of terror through the family. It wasn't just observing, it was learning. Suddenly, the creature's glowing head recoiled from the window. The bright yellow light vanished, plunging the living room into near darkness. It backed away from the house with surprising speed, retreating towards a sinkhole. "It's leaving," Sarah exclaimed, a rush of relief flooding her. On the monitor, the creature moved with strange urgency, its multiple limbs scrambling back towards the black pit. It launched itself into the abyss, disappearing in a flash of pale light and a final, wet plop. The thump-thump from the sinkhole, which had been silenced during the creature's emergence, started up again immediately, slowly at first, then gaining its familiar, rhythmic beat. The 911 operator, after hearing Tom's frantic, incoherent descriptions, had dispatched a patrol car. 20 minutes later, 2 officers arrived, skeptical and cautious. They found no signs of forced entry, no footprints, and only a perfectly circular, dark sinkhole in the backyard. The roses were still wilting, and the air still carried that faint, metallic stench, but otherwise, there was nothing. Tom showed them the camera footage. The officers watched the creature emerge, approach the house, and retreat, their faces growing progressively paler. They had no explanation, no category for what they saw. All they could do was cordon off the area and promise to call in specialists. But as the officers left, shaking their heads, the Miller family knew. The creature wasn't gone. It had simply gone back to its dark home, satisfied with its reconnaissance. It had learned about them, and it would be back. Chapter 4. The Beckoning Earth. The days that followed were a blur of terror and official skepticism. Geologists came, looked at the sinkhole, and pronounced it an anomaly. Police patrols were increased, but they found nothing. The camera, however, captured everything. Every night, around 2 a.m., the creature would emerge. Each time, it was slightly larger, slightly faster. Each time, it spent less time observing and more time interacting with the house. It would scratch at the windows, test the locks, and once they swore they heard it trying to twist the doorknob. The mimicking sounds grew more complex. It would gurgle distorted fragments of their conversations, Lily's giggles, or Josh's music, always ending with that wet, clicking sound. The Miller family was a wreck. They slept huddled together on the living room floor, staring at the monitor. The rhythmic thump-thump from the sinkhole was now a constant, almost hypnotic presence, an additional heartbeat in their home. One evening, Josh made a terrifying discovery. He was reviewing archived footage from the camera. He noticed something subtle in the background of the very first night's recording, when the sinkhole was still small. "Dad, look," he whispered, pointing at the screen. When the landscaper filled its sea, in the grainy night vision, a faint, almost invisible tendril, pale and thin, could be seen snaking out of the original, tiny hole. It had brushed against the landscaper's boot as he tamped down the soil. "It wasn't just a hole, Dad," Josh concluded, his voice trembling. It was already there. It was tasting him. The realization horrified Tom. The sinkhole wasn't just growing, it was feeding. And it was drawing them in, slowly, irresistibly. That night, the thump-thump was louder than ever. The house itself seemed to vibrate with it. The creature emerged at 1:30 a.m., larger and more defined. Its form was less pale, now a dull, earthy brown, almost blending with the night vision landscape, making its glowing eyes even more prominent. It walked directly to the back door, and this time it didn't scratch. It knocked. 3 slow, deliberate raps that echoed through the house. Knock, knock, knock. Then a familiar sound, perfectly clear, without the usual gurgles or clicks. It was Lily's voice, distorted into a mournful drone, coming from outside. "Mommy, I want to play," Sarah gasped, burying her face in Tom's shoulder. Lily let out a terrified shriek. The creature then reached a large, dark, metallic-looking limb towards the door. It wasn't trying to pry it open. It was simply resting against the wood. The wood of the door, where the limb touched, began to darken, shrivel, and recede, as if dissolving. Panic seized Tom. "We have to go. Now!" They scrambled out of the living room, heading for the front door. But as they reached the hallway, a new sound filled the house. It was the distinct, rhythmic drip, drip, drip of water. They looked down. From beneath the floorboards, a dark, viscous liquid was oozing up through the cracks in the old hardwood, pooling on the hallway floor. It smelled of that same metallic, damp earth odor, but now intensely strong, suffocating. And from the basement, a low, collective groan rose, a sound of ancient, boundless hunger. The house itself was coming alive, drawing them in. The creature outside wasn't just an intruder. It was an extension of the thing below, the true occupant. They burst through the front door, gasping for fresh air. The suburban street was quiet, bathed in the pale glow of streetlights. They sprinted toward their car, parked haphazardly in the driveway. As Tom fumbled with the keys, a low, resonant hum began to emanate from their house. The entire structure seemed to vibrate, a deep, mournful sound. They looked back. The front door of their once perfect suburban home stood ajar, and from the darkness within, through the open doorway, they could see the faint, sickly yellow glow. The creature, no longer content with the backyard, had entered. Its glowing eyes stared out from the threshold, fixing on them with an intelligent, patient malevolence. And from the depths of the sinkhole in their backyard, the incessant, heavy thump-thump beat continued, like the pulse of a massive buried heart. It was beckoning, demanding, waiting for them to return to the earth, to become one with the growing scar. The Miller family sped away, leaving behind their home, their belongings, and the gaping, breathing maw of the sinkhole. They knew, with chilling certainty, that it wouldn't be long before the house itself was swallowed whole, another offering to the insatiable hunger beneath their perfectly manicured suburban lawn. Epilogue: the spreading blight. The Millers never returned. They drove until the gas tank was empty, eventually settling hundreds of miles away, scarred and broken. Their frantic stories of a multi-limbed creature and a sentient hole in the earth were met with psychiatric referrals and incredulous looks. Their house, however, did not remain empty for long. 3 weeks after the Millers fled, the official geological survey team arrived, accompanied by a small police detail. They found the property cordoned off, the back door slightly dissolved and cracked, and the air still thick with a metallic, earthy stench. The sinkhole was now enormous, a ragged, collapsing oval nearly 15 feet across. The entire section of the backyard containing the rose bushes and the lawn was gone, replaced by a sheer-sided pit that plunged into absolute darkness. The relentless thump-thump from below was now so loud it could be felt as a physical vibration in the soles of their boots. The geologist, Dr. Alastair, peered into the pit, holding a powerful industrial flashlight. "It's not subterranean erosion, Detective," he muttered, his voice tense. "The sides are too organized. It's almost bored, and the heat signature is anomalous." He lowered a temperature probe. It registered a chilling 1 degree Celsius, 34 degrees Fahrenheit, despite the warm summer day. The ground around the hole was frozen solid. Just as the survey team began to set up seismic monitors, a subtle, disturbing event occurred. Not from the pit, but from the lawn 20 feet away. A new, small circular depression, the size of a dinner plate, opened silently in the grass near the swing set. It was identical to the first hole the Millers had found, perfectly neat and round. Then, another opened nearby, and another. Within 5 minutes, the Millers' perfectly manicured backyard was dotted with dozens of small, circular holes, like puncture wounds, all silent, all perfectly neat. Dr. Alastair slowly backed away, dropping his probe. "This isn't a collapse," he whispered. "It's spawning." The authorities retreated, classifying the entire area as a Class A environmental hazard. The Millers' house and the 6 homes immediately surrounding it were condemned and fenced off. News reports cited a massive, unprecedented geological instability caused by a shifting bedrock and faulty construction. The perimeter fence was a formality. Nothing contained the phenomenon. In the ensuing months, the blight spread. The small, neat sinkholes proliferated throughout the Miller's Old neighborhood, quietly appearing in flower beds, under sidewalks, and along driveways. The rhythmic thump-thump of the original, massive pit was replaced by a low, collective hum that seemed to emanate from the entire suburb's foundations. Residents began to complain of strange occurrences: flickering lights, unexplained drafts of icy air, and a persistent, damp, metallic smell in their basements. Children, drawing pictures in school, began drawing perfectly circular black holes in their suburban landscapes. Then, the disappearances began again, not dramatically but subtly. A neighbor's beloved dog, a homeless man sleeping in a shed, a teenager who stayed out too late, only leaving behind a single, frozen sneaker by a small, new sinkhole. The fear, palpable and silent, drove the population away, house by house. 2 years later, the once vibrant suburban town stood entirely abandoned. A ghost town surrounded by endless, perfectly green lawns, pockmarked by thousands of neat, black, silent holes. The town's official name was wiped from the map and replaced by a simple, terrifying designation on geological surveys: Zone 0. The entity beneath the earth hadn't just wanted the Miller family. It had simply used their backyard as the mouth for its true hunger. Now, with the entire suburb consumed, the silent, cold hum was the only sound, signaling that the immense, patient thing below was finally resting, full and ready to continue its slow, quiet growth outward, awaiting the next unsuspecting settlement built upon its vast, patient, and hungry foundation. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and have a great nightmares.